South Africa is a land of incredible natural diversity, with ecological regions that include mountain highlands, forests, savannas, and deserts. This same diversity can be seen in our education system. The Department of Basic Education manages almost 25,000 public schools for a population of over 12 million learners. Consider that foundation phase education is offered in 11 official languages, and one starts to get a sense of the complexity of the system.
My name is Lungi Gungubele. I graduated as a language teacher in 2008, and since then, I have worked in every phase of schooling, either teaching or training and coaching literacy teachers. Amava obomi bam andenze ndayithanda kakhulu imfundo. Mna ndikhulele elokishini emhlophe eNisna. Sibathathe ekhaya sikhuliswa ngumama yedwa. Umama ebeyithanda imfundo kwaye eqinisekisa kuba siyarhoqwa esikolweni kwaye sifumana imfundo esemgangathweni ophezulu. Imali ibinqabile besisokola kakhulu. Ukuze ndikwazi ukufunda amabanga aphantsi kwaye kwanyanzeleka kuba ndiyokuhlala kwamalume wam apho ndafumana khona imfundo engcono. Abantwana basekhaya zange balifumane bona elo thamsanqa. Ndikhule ndiwubona umahluko phakathi kwabantwana abafumene ootishala abafundisa kakuhle kunye nokubaluleka kokuthanda ukufunda nokukwazi ukuzifundela. As a literacy trainer and coach, I have been involved in many of the Department of Basic Education's programs to improve the teaching of reading and comprehension, including one of their latest initiatives, a course on teaching comprehension across the curriculum. I'm so excited about this because it is becoming increasingly important for our kids to be able to access, process, and use information. Today, I'm going with my friend and colleague, Sandy Langalala, to find out more about teaching comprehension and critical thinking skills.
As Sislungi, I'm very excited to go on this journey and to have you as like my mentor. Thank you so much.
I'm really passionate about people understanding how learners learn to read and the importance of comprehension.
Listening to Lungi, it is clear that a lot has been done to shift literacy practices in South Africa. But reforming a system is a massive challenge. Our first stop is at Nompumelelo Moholwane, who, through her work in the Research and Monitoring Unit of the Department of Education, has been involved in much of the more recent research in this area.
Thank you so much, Bomi, for joining us today. Sure. and agreeing to meet with us. Lungi was talking about how there's been a shift in the government's approach to large-scale education reform. Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, sure. So I'd say the move to using evidence for policy has been an international movement over maybe the past 15 or so years. But in South Africa, maybe two things to mention worth flagging. The Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation, who are in the presidency, have over the past 10 years really worked hard to establish a national evaluation framework and culture, and then to encourage departments to take up evaluation. So we've done, for example, an implementation evaluation of the Funza Lushaka bursary program, so which is for teachers, right? So evaluating how effective it is, are we recruiting for the right subjects, are we recruiting from districts, etc. So at that level being encouraged. But also I would say the Department of Basic Education, at least maybe 7 or 8 years from then, has been using quite a lot of evidence for planning. If you remember the new curriculum, the current curriculum, national curriculum statements, came through a ministerial review that said OBE is not working and here's what we need to do, and had maybe 3 recommendations. So 1, develop a simpler curriculum that's packaged, so CAPS being developed, and then 2, saying, but what textbooks are we using? And so we had the textbook catalog that's been rolled out, and that kind of culture of creating using evidence to inform what we do has then been established. But I think most recently our section has been saying, okay, those evaluations are almost like things that are implemented and then you evaluate them. But we are saying there's also space to innovate and try and understand what would work ideally before implementing it. And so we've been doing some research on reading in that way, focusing on the foundation phase.
With evidence and research being the way forward to development needs, what does the research say about about literacy in South Africa?
Yeah, so I think maybe 2 big points worth making. The first is South Africa's reading levels are quite low. The Progress in Reading Literacy Study, PEARLS, an international study that South Africa participates in, had us at 78% of children not being able to read for meaning.
Okay.
But the good news part of it is there's been progress over time. So at recent release of the reanalysis of the PEARLS data shows that over the past 2 cycles of PEARLS, so over about 8 to 10 years, South Africa has been improving steadily in terms of reading, but we're still not mastering the basics, and we are still at 78% of children not really comprehending, and that's quite problematic.
You talked about the steady improvement of these international results, like for the PEARLS and the SACMEC results. What would you attribute that improvement to?
Firstly is I think we are producing a better quality of teachers, and this has been seen actually when teachers were assessed. So teachers in some of these studies also write tests of some sort, so comprehension, etc. And I'm grateful that universities are producing higher quality teachers, but there's also, we are understanding more about what it takes to actually teach reading successfully. And so we're spending more time researching that in general as the country, and are able to feed that back into in-service training, into pre-service training, so the teachers are getting the right courses. But I'd also say the stability and standardization of the curriculum that's come through CAPS, and things like having workbooks, having more textbooks, and being explicit about those things being our focus has helped. And we have several reading studies where we're trying to find the most effective way of upskilling these teachers. For all teachers, they have to do professional development, but I think what we're trying to figure out is how do you maximize that time. You know, teachers are spent with all the interventions we have. We really need to be doing only things that make a difference.
In primary school, we were only allowed to speak English and Afrikaans. We weren't allowed to speak Zulu, and that hindered my own ability to speak Zulu, and there was no confidence in my own mother tongue. I don't think in Zulu. I don't dream in Zulu. So with my daughter Lula, you know, the Zulu that she'll be learning from me was already kind of a watered down Zulu, and I wanted to be multilingual as much as possible.
We have unfortunately seen multilingualism as something to be overcome rather than something to be embraced. We are in a multilingual context in South Africa, and so how can we enhance that? The biggest thing with being bilingual or multilingual is exposure. And so I would say as a parent, it would be reading to your child in both languages. It would be watching programs that are in that language. And thankfully now we have the internet, so you don't just have to rely on what's on TV. That's in
Mpumi's thoughts about multilingualism raised a whole lot of questions.
Sure.
We asked her for her thoughts on South Africa's current language policy.
For my thesis research, I've been investigating how we can implement current policies for language, but also linking language to literacy. So language is almost like the tool in which you deliver learning, but actually what you're learning is literacy, right? And you learn it in a specific language or multiple languages. And so I've been investigating policy options, and the policy does allow for the extension of mother tongue instruction until grade 6. But once you get the language part right, we now need to be working on the content, to not see it as if we just extend it to grade 6, all our problems will go away. And so I think it's about really being clear about how the components of reading link to each other, and really checking that our learners are comprehending what they're reading, because the point of reading is to understand, and we can contribute to reading, but reading can contribute to us if we understand what we are reading.
What do we still need to know about comprehension in South Africa?
We need to be understanding more about why children don't comprehend when they do read. So I think the simple understanding of that is that they understand literal questions. So what's your name? Someone can answer, but they don't understand inferential questions where they need to, like, if you make a choice or the word is not in the text, but if you read the text, you should be able to come up with an answer. But I think that's an oversimplification. We have recently seen in analyzing data that sometimes learners are not understanding the literal things, the things you think are simple, but they are understanding the things you think are complicated.
Kumnandi ukuva ngenkqubela nokuqeqeshwa kakuhle kootishala. Xa ndindwendwela amagumbi okufundela, ndise ndicinga indlela kwakunzima ngayo ukufundisa nokuqeqesha abantwana abangama-40 eklasini. Kwakudinisa, kuqoba amandla. Sinabo ootitshala abaninzi abomeleleyo, abawuthandayo umsebenzi wabo, abasisibonelo esihle, abafundisa abantwana bethu ngokuzinikela. Kodwa njengabazali, kufuneka sikhumbule nathi sinoxanduva lokuncedisa, lokuthatha inxaxheba, siqinisekise ukuba abantwana bethu bayakwazi ukufunda kwaye banezakhono zokuqiqa. I'm taking Sandy to meet Boitumelo Kuno, a literacy expert who's using her social media platform to inspire and educate parents on the importance of reading.
How did your social media page come about? Like, what made you decide, you know what, I'm going to start this page and I'm going to focus it on representation?
I've been reading to her since she was still in my tummy. I've always been very intentional about raising a reader, and just, I think also from my own love of books and enjoying books so much. And just, you know, like you're saying, with the fairy tales and the princesses with long hair, you know, as she started growing a little bit, I was more intentional about the kind of books that I wanted her to be exposed to. So I just, you know, started looking for books that had Black people as main characters, specifically Black girls as main characters. Just starting my Instagram page, I just decided, you know what, let me share these books. And I actually get quite a lot of people asking me like, hey, do you sell these books? Where do you find them? I'm like,
So you can make money on the side.
I don't sell books yet. You know,
Stock up my library first.
Yeah, I guess I'm just trying to show people what's out there. I think when she, you know, she sees a book with someone that looks like her, she gets really, really excited. So there's a story that she likes. Luna loves Library Day.
Okay.
And she keeps saying that Luna's my friend. Because Luna's always carrying a book in her hand. You know, she can relate to the characters in the story.
My daughter is 17. With me, it was also about just getting her started in reading and getting to understand the world so that we can have conversations. I remember one time, I think she was 15, I got her book about a girl that was raped, and I asked her to read the book and just come to me once she's done. That opened a conversation between us, and now I had an opportunity to tell her about gender-based violence, you know, rape, you know, body image, you know, alcohol, and just being a girl, specifically a Black girl, because it was important for me to also identify with who she is. We asked Boitumelo how she develops her daughter's comprehension skills, even at such a young age.
Sometimes when we read a story, first, you know, we just do a picture walk, and she's actually able to tell me what she sees in the picture or what she thinks is happening in the picture. Unintentionally, we have been building those comprehension skills, and even after I've read her basic story, she's able to answer the questions, you know, like what was Luna doing, who was Luna with. Most of the time I do it in English, but I would say that I code switch quite a lot, yeah. If maybe I can see that there's something that she would understand better in isiZulu, then I just explain it in isiZulu, yeah. She really surprises me, you know, like when she brings up a new word and she'll be like, no, mommy, don't do that, it's very dangerous. And I'm like, who taught you that? So I think, you know, she is definitely listening whenever I read to her, and she does pick things up, and surprisingly she does a lot of the times use new words in the correct context. And like now she's just at a stage where, you know, she'll pick a book and then she wants to read it to me. So she knows that there's words on a page and that the words carry meaning, but she can't actually, you know, read yet. So she'll be pointing at the words and pretending to read, but she's actually just like telling the story from her mind. So that's also something interesting that that I've
exposure
noticed,
to books.
Definitely. And also when she reads, you know, like she'll change her voice, and so you can see that she's imitating me and her dad whenever we
Boitumelo's passion for reading is clearly evident. We wondered if she was raised as a reader.
I think from my own personal background, no, my parents never read to me ever. You know, just I guess they were just too busy working. So my love for books is something that I really grew at school. And with my husband as well, his parents never read to him either. I think it's just her love for books actually that's making him read more. So she has her days where she doesn't want me to read to her, and she says she takes the book and she goes to daddy, you read. So she picks who she wants to read to her. So he's forced to read to her. So it definitely has rubbed off on him. It has definitely rubbed off on her grandparents because she switches between grandparents every weekend, and she always takes one of her books with her. So when she gets there, Coco read. So
Yes.
so yeah, the grandparents are also forced to read to her. I think the primary message that I'm trying to send through my page is just read early, read often. And it's a caption that I use a lot because I really think that Uthingolwe Nkosazana didn't become a book lover overnight. It's definitely something that grew because I started with her so early.
uBhotomele unomlayezo onamandla kakhulu. Njengomzali, ngidinga ukubheka phambili ukufunda kanye nokukhuluma nengane yami. Nokwenza isiqiniseko sokuthi akhule ekholwe ukuthi uhlakaniphile, unamandla, futhi muhle njengomunye nomunye. Ngiyazi ukuthi lento uLungu uyubeka phambili njalo ekhayeni lakhe.
So my son is 9 years old. He loves robotics and superheroes. But what is important for me that I've taught him is that you don't just read a book. You must read a book so that you understand what the book is about, so that you can be able to tell it to someone else and get lessons from it. So in a very early age, he does that. My daughter is an avid reader, but she's also an artist. She loves painting. So whenever she reads something, she will take it to art, and then she'll create her own picture, and then she will just draw what she thought the story was about. How about you?
Well, she's 4 and she has phases of going through which book is her favorite. So there'll be a time where I'll read one book for about 3 months because she just wants to. Yeah, and I'm reading it every night, just and obviously she can't read yet, so I'm reading for her.
Even though Lula can't read, but those repeated readings are very important for her to build her vocabulary, her language structure, and just to give her a whole picture of what you're reading. So don't stop it, because she can't read for herself, but it's very good for her language development.
Our next conversation is with Bram Fleisch, a professor at the Wits School of Education and head of the Educational Leadership and Policy Studies Center. For many years now, Bram has worked tirelessly to research how best to teach reading to children living in working class, poor and remote rural communities. We asked Bram to explain how all children can become good readers.
And there's a theory called the simple view of reading, which says that reading really consists of 2 main parts. Now, there's a lot of criticism, and they say that we should also talk about writing, but the simple view of reading does help us because it signals the 2 really important components. The one is that children need to have a thorough and rich vocabulary in the language, and then they need to have the decoding skills. So reading requires you to essentially translate the oral language into the written form and vice versa. That's a technical process. So reading is bringing these 2 pieces together, and if you want comprehension, you both have to have a thorough understanding of vocabulary, but also acquired the really strong understanding of how to do the decoding, how to do the technical aspects of written language and translating written language into an oral format of the language.
So, Bram, why is reading and comprehension so important?
So when we talk about reading, we're talking about 2 very different phases in our school system. The first is in foundation phase, where children learn to read. But from grade 4 onwards, in order to learn, they need to read. So we buy large numbers of very expensive textbooks, and we're expecting children to use those textbooks to read. They're the kind of core of our school system. And without the ability to read and read fluently with comprehension, it's very difficult for children to acquire knowledge in the natural sciences or in geography or in many other areas. It's really dependent on their ability to read well that their entire school career is anchored.
Professor Fleisch made it very clear that children need good reading skills to be able to learn. We then asked him about the impact that language has on learning.
Unless a child is a fluent speaker of the language, they're going to struggle to make sense of the text that they're working with. So if a child only knows 400 or 500 words in English, and they're confronted with a text that may require them to know and be fluent with 4,000, those children are not going to be able to make sense of that text. So comprehension is heavily dependent on a thorough familiarity with the vocabulary in that language.
Bram makes the acquisition of reading and comprehension skills sound so simple. But what support do our teachers still need to implement this effectively?
I think the challenge is for teachers to translate a very broad, very wide policy into a systematic, structured program that they can roll out that gets to the kids where they are and moves progressively in a sequential way at the right level, at the right pace for kids. So that's something that's quite sophisticated to do. Often teachers need, when they move towards a better approach to teaching reading, they often need a bit more support. They need a bit more structure. We sometimes call it a structured learning program or a structured pedagogical program. And it's not that teachers need to follow it absolutely lockstep, but they do need those really important tools, those routines that allow them to get better at teaching reading.
All the trees, soon all the grass and trees.
Part of the reason why I'm so interested in reading is that I struggle to read. I only became a reader when I was 12. And so the issues of reading and my identification with large numbers of children that don't learn to read is not because I had a fantastic teacher, but because I really struggled myself. And I know that you can overcome these challenges, and I want a situation where all children have an opportunity to become fluent readers that really flourish.
Ngazalelwa emndenini wezifundiswa nothisha. Umama wami wayenguthisha wesikole esiphakeme, futhi ubaba wayenguthisha nhloko. Imfundo yethu bayibeke phambili kakhulu. Kodwa ngangihlula ukufunda isikhathi eside. Ngempela ngaba ngumfundi ozimele enyuvesi. Ukuzwa ngokuhluleka ukufunda kukaSolwazi Flash kwakunika intshisekelo. Nginesiqiniseko sokuthi lokhu kuzokhuthaza abantu abaningi. Lungi has also told me about the incredible efforts that some schools are making to help learners who have progressed through the system without learning to read. One such school is Sangqotho Primary in Mpumalanga.
We find there are children who perform below 0. The question why? We find those kids cannot read. They cannot read. They want to read, they take the exercise or the notes in front of them, but they cannot read any sentence. Then teachers, once they identify those kids, then we started this program, whereby let's forget about the whole class, let's focus on them. For 30 minutes, sit down with them, encourage them, teach them from the alphabet, into phonics, all those things from the beginning, no matter the person is doing grade 7 or grade 6, but we're starting from 0. To encourage, if the child today can read Umama, by tomorrow Ubaba, the following day Umama, Upegela Ubaba, that will be much better because the child, it will boost confidence than starting reading. And by so doing that, the performance in the classroom will be much better. The obedience in the classroom will be much better. All those things, because you see, I'm important, I can achieve 1, 2, 3. That's what we're trying to do at the moment.
I work with about 20 learners from grade 4 till grade 7. I want to help them and I want to boost their confidence and make them believe in themselves. So, ngoba silaso sizana ukuthi sifunde, sikwazi ukufunda. So, ngoba sila nizizwa kanjani ngoba siliqumbu lethu lokufunda? Sizwe?
Sizizwa nje simnandi siphatheke kahle.
Siyabonga. Sizwa siphatheke kahle nami ngiyajabula kuba nani la. Ngoba silana ke kumele sibe nemithetho. Imithetho esoba nayo soyakha nthina njengeqembu. Yimiphi imithetho eningafisa ukuthi sibe nayo eqembini lethu? Yebo? Sihloniphane. Umunye imithetho silalelane uyihloniphe nawe.
Once again, we see the impact that a caring and involved principal and teacher can make on lives of some learners.
Ndifuna uSendi akuqonde kakuhle ukubaluleka kokufundisa abantwana ngokuphuhlileyo ingqiqo nokuqonda kunye nezakhono zokuqiqa. Ndifuna abone ukuba yenziwa njani lonto. Ukundincedisa kulomba sizodibana noXolisa Guzula ofundisa kwidyunivesithi yase-UCT kwiziko lokuqeqesha ootishala. Xolisa is an early literacy specialist with a particular interest in multilingual learning. She's also a wonderful storyteller and author. Xolisa is so committed to developing talented reading and comprehension teachers. We asked her if there was one particular teacher who inspired this.
Yes, definitely. I have Mr. Doni, was my standard 5, 6, 7 teacher. He enhanced my bilingualism, if I may put it in that way. He taught us English and geography. You know, he made us love it because he had so much passion for the subject that he was teaching, but also for the language. And one of the things, I think it does relate to comprehending, because we are learning geography in English. And in order to understand it, he made us like go outside of the classroom to experience the world, to see the mountains that he was talking about. If he was talking about a mountain pass, or if he was talking about a valley. And of course there were children who were growing up from a valley in a village called Entlanjeni. And we didn't know that Entlanjeni is a valley. So he would then say, but you come from Entlanjeni, Entlambo is a valley. Now look at it, see, and in that way, our understanding was so much enhanced, not only just by him teaching in English, but also taking us outside to see the world he's teaching about. Of course, when we talk about background knowledge or prior knowledge, it is so important in comprehension, because that whole thing by Mr. Doni taking us out to see the mountains and the rivers was part of building background knowledge for us, so that we can be able to understand the content subject that he was doing. And by the way, content subject which is geography, and he's teaching comprehension in geography. So that's an important thing that many teachers, I don't think they realize that how important that is.
So he was building basically your background knowledge and helping you make connections with the world and the text,
Definitely.
which is also very important.
Of course, those connections are important. Like, of course, one of the strategies in comprehension is making connections, making text-to-self connections, and making text-to-text connections, and making text-to-world connections. And so those are important because they get children to understand the real text that they are reading. That is not something that is out there, it's something about their lives.
In your experience with working with the teachers, because I know you've worked with a lot of teachers in the classroom, what was the teacher's biggest struggle in teaching comprehension and critical thinking?
You know, up until recently, teachers haven't been teaching comprehension. They have been assessing comprehension. So what they tell you is, okay, when you ask them, how do you teach comprehension? They will tell you that I get a passage. From this passage, I set questions. And then children must read the passage and answer the questions. And I'm like, but no, you are not teaching it then. You are assessing them. They didn't understand that it's something that can be taught and taught explicitly to the children, because
Xolisa is a strong advocate for multilingualism. We asked her to explain how she thinks the use of multiple languages can contribute to comprehension and learning.
So people try to put us as monolinguals, and they try to say you must be Xhosa now, put on your Xhosa hat, and you are English now, put on your English hat. And bilinguals do not function like monolinguals. So multilinguals are in a third space of their own. They are not English or Xhosa, they are both English and Xhosa and Sesotho and you can
and that's an advantage, isn't it?
I mean, we are in Africa, we are a multilingual continent, and we are in South Africa, we are a multilingual country, but we are using monolingual ideologies.
Xolisa's commitment to building a multilingual, literate nation is clear.
So we need to be inspiring each other to become readers. My word to the nation is, children learn from us. They get their literacy practices from what we do. So it starts from the home, it starts from the community, it starts from the teachers that we have in our schooling. They have to be readers themselves to inspire others to be.
Ngithandile indaba kaXolisa mayelana nothisha wakhe wesiNgisi kanye nezezwe. Nokumuzwa ekhuluma ngesidingo sokufundisa okucacile amasu okuqondisisa. Kwangenza ngicabange ngezikhathi engibone uLungi enza lokho.
Visualize the story. Make a mental movie. As you think about the story, I also want you to think about what's right and what's wrong in the story. When I read, I will show you how I make my own evaluation of the story. Well, maybe just one kick. Mom will never know. Jabu thought, as he ran towards his friend. He tried to run carefully. He didn't want to break the eggs. I can make an evaluation that Jabu isn't always careful. He is now going to play and he's got eggs with him. He's carrying the eggs. How do you know that Jabu is not a careful person?
Because he broke eggs and milk.
Because he broke the eggs and the milk? Thank you for that answer. How else do we know that he's not careful?
Because he played the ball.
He played the ball while he had the eggs and the milk with him. Very good.
Because his mother and shopkeeper told him to be careful.
He was told by the mother and the shopkeeper to be careful, and he was not careful. Last one.
Jabu was covered in slimy eggs because he didn't listen to his mother and the shopkeeper carefully.
As well as speaking to different experts, I think it is important for us to hear from some learners about the importance of having caring, dedicated teachers.
I'll have to say Sekhatem. He's my English teacher and he's great. The way he talks with us, like other English teachers, when they teach, we don't really understand them. I personally don't really understand them. But when I'm taught by, say, Khadebe, like I just understand everything.
Okay. Mrs. Randau, she teaches me maths. She actually helped me understand maths quite easily than I used to perceive it. She's so patient and I ended up being good in maths.
Mrs. Diale, she teaches science. It's a quite challenging subject, but she just makes it more interesting and we're able to learn and understand more easier.
Where do you get books? Do you read besides reading for school? When do you get to read other books?
When my sister brings it from work, yeah, that's the only time I get to touch a book and read it.
I sometimes download them audiobooks, like the one I'm reading now, Relentless by Tim Grove.
So how do you get that internet?
I usually travel to the mall for like 30 minutes of internet access.
These young people are so eager to read and learn. As parents, communities and schools, we need to try and facilitate this in different ways.
And we can't even research because we're not having free access to internet.
Sometimes it becomes a challenge when you want to apply for varsity. Like I tried to apply so many times. I couldn't like process and get all the documents for my application.
Why would you want internet access?
So that we can research maybe projects. We can learn more.
I now realize how important it is for all teachers to be properly trained and how to teach comprehension and critical thinking skills. But I kept hearing the same thing from this group. How important it is to have teachers who really care about their learners and who make a real effort to help learners understand their lessons. Having heard from a few high school learners, Lungi and I are now meeting a group of first-year university students. We want to know more about the role that comprehension and critical thinking plays in the transition between school and varsity.
I would say that the language barrier was the biggest challenge for most of us.
So now you have to write an English essay or something like that. You have to like think in English. So that also becomes a challenge.
Basically with high school is that you weren't taught how to critique text. You weren't also taught how to contextualize, and put your environment and, mix that with what you're writing, right? However, in varsity, that is what is actually required.
That's the only way you can actually adapt to varsity faster, by acknowledging that in high school you explore a certain thing, but now in varsity you are able to apply what you learned.
To understand a text deeply, you have to ask yourself, how does it affect you? If you were in that certain situation, what would you have done? And what can you learn from it and apply it in your life? Has it changed anything? Has it changed the way I think or the way I see things?
I think debating is really good because you need to be able to convince people why your argument is plausible. And I think that's very important. And it also builds your confidence because you need to now present something to people.
Yes.
And if you're not confident, you're not going to make a good case. Yeah.
Once again, it's fascinating to hear how impactful a nurturing environment created by a caring, invested teacher can be.
Well, the best teacher for me was Miss Nongauza, my life sciences teacher. She would make us watch videos to understand the content more. And when your marks were dropping, she would like call you and tell you that you have to pick your socks up because your marks are dropping. And I wanted to also impress her, so I had to study more.
I would say that it was my Afrikaans teacher, Mr. Bota. My first speech in his class was on gangsterism. And he had me like saying, yo, Masakan, what can you say? And I was like, yo, I can't be doing something like that.
He introduced me also to debating so as to connect history and debating, you know. He even introduced me to being a junior city councillor of Cape Town. Wow. So he had that great impact because, you know, I got to experience a lot of things, and he introduced me to a lot of opportunities because he knew that, you know, it is important for me and it is important for my life. So yeah, Mr. Kolinsky.
As education students, we asked the group what kind of teachers they would want to be one day.
So for me, I want them to think for themselves so that when it comes to varsity, that won't be a barrier for them.
I want to be the catcher in the rye in context of what you do. So yeah, I'll go back to my community, the underprivileged community, to save them from that experience that I had from gangsterism and so forth, and give them an opportunity, you know.
Make it fun, because you will never excel in something if you like, you know what, I'm just doing it because, you know, I have to do it. And you want a student to come to school and be like, yo, I'm looking forward for ma'am's class because I know we're going to be doing this and this and this, which is very different from other teachers or whatever. And eventually it should be a movement that children look forward to go to school and enjoy learning.
I would encourage my learners to become more curious, because when you are curious, you become exposed to more things and you just think beyond your environment. You don't care that you're from Khayelitsha, you know, you can do anything as long as you have the knowledge and the courage to do it.
Ibilolunye uhambo olu kuhambe phambili kumo ukuhlangana nabantwana besikolo kunye nabantwana abenza unyaka wokuqala kwizifundo zobutitshala. Ndikhuthazwe kukuzimisela kwabo, intshisakalelo nendlela abazibona ngayo izinto. I thought we should end this journey by looking forward. We need to know how important the issues of language, learning and critical thinking are as we enter the 4th Industrial Revolution. To help us understand this, we are meeting Vice-Chancellor Professor Tshilidzi Marwala from the University of Johannesburg. As well as being the principal of the university, Professor Marwala is an expert in artificial intelligence. We asked Professor Marwala about his own early experiences of language and learning.
I think I received excellent education growing up, both in my home, with my parents, my grandparents, and outside it. I think the dedication of the teachers, the dedication of the parents and the community, you cannot underestimate that. I attended the primary school in my village. I attended 2 primary schools, and everything was in the local language. So we taught mathematics in the local language. So the concept of multiplication, the concept of division, you know, the concept of fractions, all those concepts I actually still think of them in Venda. I mean, it's quite, you know, it's quite extraordinary after so many years, you know. And then I moved to high school. I went to a high school not very far from where I live. So when I arrived in this new high school, the teachers were not necessarily local teachers. In fact, the teachers were from all over the place. So we were forced to learn in English. And of course, it was not your typical English. Because now if I start to think hard of the teachers who taught me, how many of them were native English speakers. Then I realized that no, I can't think of anyone who was a native speaker. And that became very, very important, especially when I became a dean here at the University of Johannesburg. We had a complaint when some of our students were saying that some of the teachers, we can't hear them. You know, some of the teachers from the rest of the African continent, some of the teachers from India, we can't hear them. You know, and I said, no, this is how the world is. You know, if you cannot be able to hear them, you are not going to be able to survive. So I learned it there. I was forced to learn it. Our classmates not all of them were Venda speaking. The teachers had their children in the school. You know, so some of them did not necessarily know how to speak Venda, you know. That gave me an interest in language.
Okay. We asked Professor for his view on how the transition from high school to tertiary education affects students.
I don't think the South African university system manages the transition from high school to university very well. You know, when I was in North America, because it was the first time I was at university. If you fail a course, I never failed a course, I graduated magna cum laude. It will not be reflected in your transcript in the first year because they understand that it is a transitional period, and many of the kids have never actually lived alone independently. It's for the first time. And I also heard that if you go to MIT, one of the leading universities in the world, they don't even show you your actual mark in your transcript, you know, because you have all these kids who were at the top of their class. So you have to manage that shock. So we need to manage that transition very, very well. The staff to student ratios are not in our favor. Our classrooms are way too big. And many of our first-year students are completely lost when they arrive. I always tell my staff that you should treat these young people like they are your children. You have to be patient with them. And when I was in the first year, I lost my beloved grandmother that I often talk about. I was shocked when a professor, he actually called me to send his condolences and to tell me that I should take time to mourn. He will be there to go over the material that I would have missed during the time. And I often ask myself, are we offering the same service to our students here? No. So we need to do something about our behavior as educators and our interaction with the students.
Professor Marwala shares such valuable insights. We asked him how teachers can better prepare their learners for the fourth industrial revolution.
That multidisciplinarity is very, very important. It's very important, especially given the fact that we are living in a world where technology, human being, society, and culture are converging. They are converging. You know, if you are speaking to a machine, a new culture is being born. The machine has its own culture, you know, and so on and so forth, you know. And for us to be able to make sense of that, we have to understand technology on one hand, and we have to understand society, language, and so on and so forth on the other hand. We need to create a culture of learning. I think there is something about the culture of learning that is disappearing from our society. The culture of understanding that to move society forward, knowledge is very, very important. We need to reignite that. Every time I go to Asia and I go to China many, many times, I'm very impressed by their attitude towards learning. And you can see the economic consequences of that attitude. So we need to inculcate the culture of learning, the culture of reading, very, very important, because the world is very complex. And to navigate it, you need to know things. And the most effective way of knowing things is obviously reading. You can experience the world, but many things you're not going to be able to experience it. For example, if you wanted to learn about Einstein's theory of relativity, you're not going to learn it from experience. You can only learn it from reading. Maybe you can learn it from watching a video or on YouTube. Yeah, that's another mechanism that is appearing now, which I will include as part of learning.
Professor Marwala has given us so much to think about. Finally, we asked him to share a message with the nation.
As parents, we should be involved in educating our children. Education is not what happens at school, it's also what happens at home. We should be involved at home and also in school. And my message for the young people is never stop dreaming. I'm not a religious person, but there is a statement that comes from the Christian Bible. Be born again like children. What it basically is saying is that be inquisitive like a child. Be curious, ask questions. The measure of how clever you are is not by how many questions you can answer, but by how many questions you can pose. That is not my statement. That is what Albert Einstein once said.
The Department of Basic Education, working with the NECT, the ETDP-SETA and SACE, recognizes and is taking action to address the teaching and learning of reading and comprehension in many different ways. One recent initiative is a virtual professional development course available to all teachers called Comprehension Across the Curriculum. If you are registered with the South African Council of Educators and employed by the Department of Basic Education, please feel free to contact curriculum officials at your district office for more information. This course, together with the available eFile and home language structured learning programs, can also be accessed from the National Education Collaboration Trust website, www.nect.org.za.